Got multiple different generations of Arcade1up units, from some that are somewhat newer between my Pac-Man units, my Partycades, and even Countercades, and some that are still from the early generation of Arcade1up when it comes to things like the Final Fight unit. And one of the things that I've realized over recent times is that, well, I've had a lot of fun with some of these units like my Final Fight. It's something that increasingly gets less and less playtime. And it's potentially a unit that I'm going to be just getting rid of at some time in the near future to make way for newer arcade units, whether that's 1UP or a different brand, I'm not sure. In this video, I'm going to go over why that is and why, if you're looking for one of these secondhand, some of the things to look out for. So let's take a look. I picked up the Final Fight Arcade1up cabinet back in what I consider the peak era of Arcade1up, which really, when you think about it, was only a handful of years ago at this point. But back in that time period, and we're talking 2021, 2022, there were a lot of machines starting to hit the market from 1UP, a lot of different experiments from Arcade1up, a lot of different units, some that really landed well, some that didn't land so well. And one that kind of got thrown into the mix, and I don't recall at that time period being as popular as some of the other conventional Mortal Kombat's or Street Fighter units, was the Final Fight. But I, growing up, was into Final Fight quite a bit. I played it quite a bit at the arcade, so I invested a lot of time in that game as a kid. And so for me, having this unit in my home arcade seemed like, at that time period, something that was a must-have. And I'd probably even have some posts floating around on old Facebook Arcade1up posts saying that I got one of my grails or something for my home arcade. And I want to highlight some things. That this unit is generally pretty good. It has a good screen. The control deck, they're all 2-button games on this machine. It works just as you'd expect and works well as far as I'm concerned. It's lacking some of the later features of more conventional Arcade1up machines that came out in the last couple of years, like the variable sound setting or control settings or testing, or even game settings in general. But for the most part, the machine works and works well. Where this machine, though, is starting to really show its cracks as far as my home arcade is concerned is, I'll be transparent, after beating Final Fight like 10 times on this machine and beating 1944 and dabbling into Ghosts and Goblins and Strider, I don't find that I get as much replayability based off of the game selection on this machine. Now, it's not to say that they're bad games or that they're games that, you know, aren't worth having a machine for, but for what I got going on down here for my full quarter scale cabinets, this machine doesn't really get touched as much as I'd hope, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And I'm looking at some other machines for the tail end of this year that I'm going to consider replacing it with. And I think of all my 3/4 scale cabs, this is going to be the one to go. And again, it's not a knock at the machine. I like the artwork. I like the nostalgia of saying I have Final Fight. I like even the way the artwork's peppered on the marquee and around the surround of the screen. I like everything about this cab in terms of aesthetics. I just find that the replayability of this unit isn't that great. And unlike my Marvel superheroes, where I do find myself jumping into Punisher multiple times, and that's a game that I speak incredibly highly of, and I know that might be controversial for some of you Final Fight purists, I just don't find that Final Fight carries the same replayability as a game like that. And as a result, when I think about units that I actively play in here, that's probably one of the least touched ones that I own. So this video was kind of put together as I see a lot of people still collecting some of these old units. I also like to document the changes of my home arcade, and I still see people talking about the Final Fight cab. And again, it is a good cab, and if you're a Final Fight diehard to the point that you think you're going to be putting, 1,000 hours into this game over and over and over again, it's a good machine. But I think it's really held back by that era of Arcade1ups, where you'd only get a handful of games on a machine with very limited features, and really that's all you had. And I felt like the game selection on this machine, more than some of the other Arcade1ups, was not as cohesive as you got like on a Marvel Superheroes or an X-Men vs Street Fighter. And ultimately, while there are some great games on this, especially Final Fight, I just don't think this machine carries much replayability compared to some of the other machines that I've went over on this channel.